Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Count Christo, and this is Tinto Talk 12 International Organizations. It is a big one. This is the dev diary where they reveal what is so far the single most exciting, I think feature is the right word, of EU5 so far. International organizations are the systematizing of the best bits of EU4. But in EU4, they're bolted on, and here they're integral to the game design. They're integral to the systems. Let's get into it. As you can tell, I am positive about today's dev diary. This seems really good. Like really, really good. We will look at maps in more detail, but look at that HRE. Oh my god. That's going to be fun. That's going to be fun. All right. So let's talk about it. What the heck is an international organization? Why is Christo excited about what sounds like an NGO? So this is basically the way they're going to do region or nation or culture or religion specific flavor. It seems like a lot of it is going to come from this. So for example, in EU4, I always play in the HRE or near the HRE, almost always. And it's not just because Europe is really powerful and things. It's because the HRE means you have this content, right? EU4, and then you have the HRE. It's a bonus. It's extra. And so I always play near the HRE. It's just a fun system to interact with. What this does is it makes it so instead of the HRE just being something that's added to the game and specific here, it means that similar systems and similar types of things can exist all over the world with all kinds of different rules, all kinds of different setups, all kinds of different ways of interacting with them. And it's amazing. It doesn't mean you can set up your own HRE in Southeast Asia. That's not how it works. You can't manually, you can't build your own ones. There are some that I think you'll be able to found potentially, and it'll be interesting to see how that works and how that evolves. But you can't just like decide, okay, we're going to have the HRE in Northern Ireland now, and there's a new HRE. But let's talk a little bit more, less in the abstract and more about what these things are. So we had hard-coded systems. Now we have a dynamic system, 100% scriptable and extendable for modders. Mayo and taxes. So what are we calling it? Is it Mayo and taxes? I mean, the devs should get to decide, but is it Mayo and taxes 2.0 or is it Mayo and taxes 4.0? Or is it Mayo and taxes 3.0 because there was a Mayo and taxes... No, there wasn't a Mayo... Was there a Mayo and taxes for EU3? Or was there just a death and taxes and a separate one? Anyway, it's moddable, baby. These are going to be really, really interesting. Okay, so what is an international organization? Group of countries that share some common things, and then quite a few attributes. So let's take a look. I'm not usually just reading these out, but let's take a look at all of the different things that these international organizations can have. It can have a leader or not, and the leader can be a character or a country. Interesting. So in the example of it being a character, I guess would be like the Pope, or maybe the Holy Roman Emperor as well, as opposed to it being just the kind of primary kingdom of the Holy Roman Emperor, because there is no primary kingdom in personal unions, as we've already learned. It can be unique or there can be multiple. So a good example of this we'll get to later is coalitions. So a coalition is an example of an international organization. So way more dynamic, interesting ways that we can interact with coalitions, and coalitions can form and change. That's going to be fun. Its locations can be owned by organizations or not. I'm unsure if the HRE owns these locations or if they're merely in it. Is there a difference between owning a location and a location being in an organization? All these things we can see. There can be benefits or penalties for members, presumably or both. This could be, maybe this is an inclusive or. It can have laws and policies. We'll need to see, well, I mean, the obvious example here is centralizing for the HRE, that kind of thing. Special statuses inside the organization, so elector bishoprics, potentially, kingdoms within the HRE, like Bohemia, formally allowed to be a kingdom within the HRE, I think. How members will behave during wars, so are they all called to arms? Do they provide support? All kinds of things you can have there, and dozens more. So these are going to give the content designers of EU5 so much freedom to mean that they can do interesting, different, dynamic things, and they're not just designing a system and bolting it on. Great example, in my opinion. It's my example, so maybe that's a little prideful. The Golden Century DLC for EU4 added the ability to have kind of orders in states if you're Iberian and things like that, and it's so tacked on, and I didn't like it at the time, and you can't go anywhere with it, right? Whereas if you had something like this, you have an international organization which organically arrives in Iberia when they're starting to do a lot of kind of overseas religious zealotry or something, and it means that provinces it affects have this impact, and it can dynamically shift and change, and it's gonna be so good. Okay, so common organizations. The obvious ones are coalitions, and then there are also unions. A defensive alliance between countries that share the same ruler may or may not have different levels of integration. So it's interesting. So this is the kind of new personal unions getting bound up into this system, which seems very cool. And then there are religious organizations. So the Catholic Church is one of these organizations. It's not just, you get this system because you're in the, you have this particular religion necessarily. It's not just you get these modifiers. You actually have this dynamic membership of West Christendom will exist, which is dope. So, for example, Catholic countries pay a tithe to the church, which finds its way to the papacy, presumably, less a little bit of corruption along the way. Although, of course, depending on your alignment, anything finding its way to the papacy is itself also corruption. Scouring of the temple vibes and all that. But we'll see. It's going to be really interesting. So you can pay taxes to these institutions. Sorry, these organizations. Can you create an organization? Like, are there historical organizations which mean the members pay tax that you could find your way to being in charge of and then increase who's a member of it? I guess if you're the papacy and you convert an Orthodox country to Catholicism, now their pops pay you tithes. That's cool. That sounds like it's going to be a fun run. Play as the papacy, never own any land outside of Italy, but make the whole world Catholic and therefore pay you tithes. So you get this insanely rich Italy. That would be dope. Crusades and jihads are also organizations, temporary international organizations. So the idea that these form and dissolve organically as time goes on, and they act like an alliance against a country. Autocephalos patriarchs. So you have meaning self-headed. Patriarchate is a metropolitan bishop in the Eastern Christian confessions. So you can have these, similar to the Catholic Church, but kind of more localized, because the East Orthodox are more easily able to kind of cleave out their own area. They get their own bishops deciding on anything affecting their own religious jurisdiction. So divorces, maybe something like that. And I'm not sure what else that could affect. I guess maybe ruling on tolerance of heretics could be connected to this. All kinds of things that could be connected into this. I'm work in progress graphics, of course. And so there's one for Orthodox, Miaphysite, other Eastern European confessions, many more. Some have a central organization, others have more fragmented ones, so I very much doubt there's going to be an Islamic organization, for example. There's probably not going to be a Buddhist organization. I have to imagine Japanese Buddhists are really rather separate in terms of organization from, Burmese ones, Myanmarian ones. But yeah. So then there are specific ones, a fair amount of completely unique and flavorful organizations. DLC are going to add more of these, almost certainly, and people are going to be like, why wasn't that in there in the game start? We only got X at the game start. It should have been X plus however many have been released since then, at least, and so on. But the unique ones are going to be interesting, because this is a really interesting way for the devs to add content, right? It's going to be easy to add well-integrated content that synergizes with other bits of content, even if you only own some of the DLC, which is such a challenge in Paradox games, because so often they're tempted to just tack things on, which don't add interesting systems everyone can engage with. Hearts of Iron 4, much as I love the game, should I say loved? I haven't played it in quite a while, but anyway, it's a really good game, but it really has this problem with its DLC. So many of Hoi4's DLCs add these little systems, sometimes that are quite impactful, to exactly one nation, and they have a new UI that's entirely custom built just to deal with them, and other countries can't interact with the system and you can only play the system. It's like the US Senate, for example. It's really unsatisfying to have these tacked on systems just for specific countries, whereas when you have these fully scripted, fully embedded into the game systems that you can add to and change. Mwah. I love it. I love it. So this is the Tartar Yoke, for example. It's the Middle Kingdom in China with their tributary system. This is the Holy Roman Empire, all these unique ones. The Shogunate, the High Kingship of Ireland, many more. The system is very flexible. This is a system that makes Tinto better at making games. And that's so exciting. They've shown that they've got all these good ideas, but in some way, the most important idea is the ideas that let them, deliver their ideas and let them flesh these things out and make it easier to develop. It's a good one. Organizations can have progress down a particular path, like centralized HRE and native federations, which I thought was interesting. How do trade leagues and Hansas work through this? No, they have other mechanics, which is interesting. So I was surprised to learn that the Hansa, for example, trade leagues are not international organizations, or maybe they have other mechanics as well as these. Not sure. So I worry that international organizations, which described, will become modular, lack of real uniqueness, like religion in CK3. Very fair concern. Each of them will have more flavor and uniqueness than a hard-coded, simpler systems of the path. So they're saying essentially, yes, we're making the HRE one example of many of these international organizations, but it's still going to have more flavor and uniqueness than the HRE and EU4, which is dope as hell if true. So this is an interesting one. The Golden Horde is not a part of the Tartar Yoke. They own it, which means they have this kind of special relationship with it. So the idea that you can have these organizations that you are connected to but not a member of is interesting. So you can presumably still be the emperor without being in the HRE organization. Interesting. No subjects. Maybe we didn't know this already. I said it earlier as if we knew it, but maybe you didn't know it if you have just been watching these videos and not reading along. There are no subjects in a personal union. All countries are equal in a union. Good to know. And the HRE starts without an emperor because there is no emperor in 1337, which is interesting. So I wonder how. What does that mean? Where do my taxes go when there is no emperor? Where do my tithes go? Who controls things? What's going on? Modders can make their own organizations really easily, and a player has to play with the ones in the game. So you can't found new ones. You can't found a Catholic Church for Protestants with its own cardinals and laws, as the poster asks. What I don't know if it has been confirmed is, can they arise even if they're, like when he says in the game, I think he means in the game's code, not in the game like the ones that are there in 1337. Because it would be very odd if no new international organizations arose over the course. I mean, obviously we know that coalitions and ones do, but it would be very odd if no new kind of flavorful, unique ones arose. Like surely Calvinism as an organization makes sense to some. Maybe that's a bad example, but it really seems like there should be other organizations that can arise, and we'll see whether we get that. Land ownership for the HRE is different from country membership, so similar to EU4, we understand how that works. Although perhaps it's not just about your capital being in, it's country membership, entirely agnostic of land ownership, which would be a little different. And yes, so you need to sign an alliance with your personal union member in order to join offensive wars, which is interesting. And there are ways of making personal unions integrated, of making them, more and more connected, which I imagine are going to be ways in which each nation interacts with the international organization. And if I'm Scotland, and so I'm playing as Scotland, I'm not playing as the King of Scotland, I'm playing as Scotland, that's how we're understanding it so far. And then my king happens to become King of England as well, because the Tudors just aren't that good at having kids. What that means is that I, Scotland, don't get England. I just become an equal member, and we'll see how that works, of an international organization which represents the fact that there is the same king of both Scotland and England. And if my king says he'll return to Scotland every 2 years to tend to his subjects there and then never returns for the rest of his natural life, what do I do? Can I work to integrate Scotland and England as the smaller partner? How do I How do we know who I play as if they unite? Can you actually unite the two countries? If I unite Scotland and England, or if England works to make the international organization more tightly connected, and then they properly unite in a kind of Union of the Crowns situation, do I play as the UK? Or because England pushed to do it, am I annexed and my game ends? I don't know. And that is interesting. There is a consensus among the community that different diplomatic actions and relations should have different costs. Oh yes, so this is interesting. They did in the end, I think, land on, or I mean, everything is in flux, but diplomatic capacity, as in you can have 7 diplomatic relationships, is simple and easier to understand. Diplomatic capacity in terms of you have 800 diplo power and it costs 150 to ally France and only 50 to ally Ulm is difficult because it's usually not 50, is it? It's usually 37.2, and dealing with these small numbers is a pain and less fun and less intuitive. But as Johan points out, an alliance between France and Ulm should cost more for Ulm than France. It's going to be very interesting how that pans out. International organizations are not eternal and can disappear. Some will fail as soon as there's not a valid leader country. Others are more aspirational or cultural in nature and don't necessarily need a leader. The High Kingship of Ireland falls into the latter. Membership and therefore leadership is limited to specific kinds of countries with the capital in Ireland, and it will persist as long as it has members. So if you can remove all of the kingdoms from Ireland, remove all of the nations with capitals in Ireland, this will go away, which might be helpful for England, or it might be negative because England, the High Kingship of Ireland, my Irish history is not as good as it could be, but basically at various points the High King was bending the knee to England to greater and lesser extents. And so maybe one way to kind of get Ireland under control is a pliant High King. Right, and then you don't have to conquer the area directly, but you maybe can get some benefits from a pliant High King. Be interesting to see. Theoretically, England can become the High King if it manages to become a valid member, but if it doesn't, the international organization will fall out of existence once all its member countries become extinct, all of course in development and subject to change. But yeah, really interesting the way that you interact with regions differently because of their international setup is very exciting to me. The number of both secular and ecclesiastical electors may be increased by approving further imperial laws, and they aren't fixed to land. So, for example, the emperor can replace Palatinate of the Rhine with the electorate of Bavaria by using imperial authority. Oh, baby. Sounds exciting. Sounds exciting to me. So, with how versatile they are, why would you not just make it a broader diplomatic treaty? So, like alliances and things like that. So international organizations are multiple countries connected together, and treaties are bilateral only. So England can have an alliance with France, or England and France and Germany can be banded together in a coalition against Spain. But England being allied to France, and England being allied to Germany, and Germany being allied to France isn't the same as them all being in an organization. That has different implications. If Spain were to attack France, it would call both the others. But if, it could have differences. And I gave a bad example because that was a trilateral alliance. But if you had England allied to France, France allied to Germany, that's different, right? Because then if France attacks England, Germany's not involved. But if there's a coalition, probably they are. There you go. 18 minutes on international organizations. That's a heck of a feature. I'm very, very excited to see how this pans out and where they go with this. Because it's going to be... It really feels like it gives them room to maneuver, room to keep the systems connected, to avoid the kind of tech debt of endless tacked-on systems. Many of which systems I like, by the way, but the way that they don't connect to each other really starts to weigh on some of the older Paradox games. It's exciting stuff. It's exciting stuff. Thank you for watching. We'll check in next week or next video rather for... I can't remember. Let me check. Was I paused recording that whole time? No? I just paused and then immediately unpaused, I think. Okay, hang on. Ah, yes. Religion. Tune in next time for religion, and I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.